all in all, the combination is large. So what you've got is a 3.5 ton gun and a 3.5 ton truck. And the reason these lads are in their airborne kit is that this combination was dropped into Arnhem in September 1944 in gliders. We're going to fire.
1 minute.
And you can imagine how frightening it would be to be strapped into a wooden glider with this combination and a lot of ammunition, and you would then drop from probably 2,000, 3,000 feet into a field. And they actually had a very good success rate. I think it was 11 of the 17 gliders that brought these into Arnhem landed successfully, and the guns got away and later went on to fight around Arnhem in the battles there. If any of you are nervous, then cover your ears. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. That was the noonday gun. But essentially, it was, for its day, an absolutely revolutionary vehicle. Four-wheel drive. It had a four-cylinder Meadows engine, which in fact was, again, a bit of a typically British bodge, in that it was a marine engine. It had been designed originally for pumping water out of the bilges on ships, and was a 59 horsepower engine. Pretty basic by today's, well, very basic by today's standards, and pretty basic by the standards of the day, but it was tough, rugged and reliable. Now, what it's towing is an 18-pounder field gun, which is another very rare beast. The recoil mechanism is mounted beneath the gun here, whereas in the First World War the recoil mechanism was mounted above the gun. But what you'd got was originally what they call a wire-wound gun barrel. So it was a steel, much smaller than the barrel you see now, which was then wound with wire on a machine that kept the tension very tight, but allowed them to pack in and to make quite a complex shape on the outside of the barrel without machining it. And that was then slid into an outer cover, which is the cover that you see on the gun. Normally the barrels would have a life of about 15,000 rounds, but depending on the type of ammunition that they fired, it could be reduced quite dramatically. They also had several different charges, so you could reduce the charge if you wanted your shells to fall much shorter. If you want to fire one round now, chaps, and let's just see how loud it is. Now in theory, if that had been firing a live round, it would have been firing either probably a shrapnel or a high explosive or possibly a gas shell, and that would have been going out to about 6,500 yards. They came out with another modification of the 18-pounder, which is what you see, but with a split trail. And so basically it's got the two legs at the back like the 17-pounder. I mentioned the wagon wheels, and initially this gun, when it came out, had the wooden cart wheels. And that was fine when you were towing them behind horses, but once you got a guy quadrant or another vehicle to tow them, it was just too fast and the wheels tended to break up. I think I'm right in saying that the bore on this particular gun is 84mm, which again is standard for the 18-pounders. The other nice thing with this gun, as I mentioned, is that it can fire quite quickly. You could knock out something like 18 rounds per minute quite efficiently with this, but again you tended only to do that when it was absolutely necessary. So let's hear this one fire again, can we? Can we hear 2 rounds please? Yep. Fire when you're ready. This particular gun, we don't know an awful lot of its history, other than the fact that it came almost certainly from the Irish Army, who bought several of these guns in the late 20s. They were used as part of the formation of the Irish nation in their independence battles, but this one was later than that, but we believe it was one of 4 guns that served with their army. Although they were technically obsolete by 1942, the Irish Army put theirs into store, and effectively they were still on strength through until 1972. This particular gun was then bought by an enthusiast and essentially sat in his shed through until quite recently, and it will be restored. This gun is live and could be firing live rounds. The other thing you've got, you see the little cart in between the guy and the gun, and that's called a limber. It carries, I think it's 36 rounds of live ammunition ready to be fired, and it travels everywhere with the gun. There would normally be 2 men who sit on the limber and travelled on the limber, and then the gun runs on behind. We're seeing now how it's slightly more cumbersome to load up. And backing the guy quad is always difficult because it's got such a short wheelbase. I mentioned the winch. If you were unlucky enough to have the gun slide into a ditch or somewhere where you didn't want it, there is a very powerful winch in the middle which you can pay out either at the back of the quad or at the front, and you would then winch the gun back up onto the back of the quad. You'll see there's a tool tray on the front of the limber, and that's something which this gun acquired when it was with the Irish Army rather than with the British Army. The British Army tended not to be terribly keen on its soldiers sitting on the outside of vehicles. They tended to prefer them inside. But you can imagine that quad with 6 chaps inside, all their kit, their gear, their tents, their bedding, their food, was very compact. I think the crew have realised now that they're going to need to pull the gun up to load it onto the limber. And in best traditions, a little bit of hard labour. The Guy Quad Ant was quite capable of towing loads of up to 14 tons behind it, which is really not bad on a slightly less than 60 horsepower engine, and it could tow 14 tons up a 1-in-2 incline. It's selectable 4-wheel drive. I think we're probably in 2-wheel drive today because it's dry, and we're also in high ratio, but the low ratios are extremely low and allow you to crawl and pull a very, very heavy load indeed. They tended to be for ordinary 1500 weights rather than field artillery tractors. Most of the field artillery tractor production was picked up by Morris Commercial, and I'm not actually sure why, because there is nothing wrong with the guide trucks. I've heard people say that their seating position and driving position was very uncomfortable, but I haven't met a British vehicle yet that hasn't got an uncomfortable driving position. Here we see the 17-pounder again. So you can see there that the gun layer is now acquiring his target.
Ready when you are.
So let's assume for a moment then that you've got a German tank popping up probably somewhere between 1500 and 2000 metres in that direction. The crew have seen them, they've loaded with the appropriate ammunition, and when they're ready, they're going to fire.